It's not related to the to the question, but people started to send me messages that Danny asked me a question. Sorry, I couldn't hear. Danny, can you ask it again?
Yeah,
I'm
no,
sorry.
I was asking Anna, what was your experience or your expectation of the role of clinical epidemiologists in a community like Odyssey, where you have, pretty much a mixture of epi clinicians and bioinformatics, and whether you think that clinical epi is a field on its own in this kind of mixture of fields, or whether it is just like a bridge between the different areas of expertise in the community.
Oh, that's a very good question. It really is, and you see, I'm kind of biased because I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm a clinician. Although now, like when I talk to real epidemiologists, I don't see why being an MD is that important, because, like, for example, look at Patrick. He's very proficient in his field, and sometimes he tells me something about drugs that I don't know. So I guess that either if you're an epidemiologist or if you're a clinician familiar with the epi methods, you can contribute to research. And I think that every team has to have um, such a person, because a lot of the studies really rely on how you define them rather on how you execute them. So from this perspective, I think it may be a bridge between something, but still it's the epidemiologist, and epidemiology is the key figure in any type of research that we're doing here. And sorry for pivoting the discussion from what Andrew said.
So that's fine. Anna, do I understand correctly that one important thing that I'm taking from that is that you think that clinicians or clinical epidemiologists, who don't necessarily need to be clinicians, are most important at the stage of phenotyping? Is that where you see the role of clinical epi in this community?
I think at the research, at the study, at the stage of study design in general. So that's not only phenotyping, but also designing the study itself. Like, do you select self-control design, or do you select cohort design, or do you select something else? That may influence the results more than your selection of patients. So you may create a perfect phenotype in terms of clinical idea, and you can use your clinical knowledge to really make sure that you're selecting the right patients. But then if you are not using the right design, you'll get biased results. And since there are so many biases in observational studies that you can encounter, it's really important to have this person who's A, familiar with those biases, and B, know how to handle them. And this is not something you can learn from vignettes or Odyssey forum. This is something you, I think, have to have a fundamental knowledge about. So at least take a course. This is what I'm trying to say. So the answer to your question is no, it's not only in the stage of phenotyping, but on the stage of designing the study in general.
Thank you, Anna.
Hey,
Sorry, somebody else.
yeah, this is Gautam. I'm speaking to Az's microphone, so you'll see her highlighted there, but we're in the same room. I think I agree with Anna about biases. The biggest limitation of our field is reduction of biases. We have so much data that is captured in various systems, that the data is captured for various reasons, not related to the study, and then we fit that data to answer a question in an unbiased way. And to do that, we definitely need to have the various expertise available as a team or in one person, if that is when possible, so that we can address those. And clinical epidemiology, as I think about it, is definitely a jack of all trades kind of an idea, where you have to understand a little bit of the disease, but don't have to be an expert on it. You got to understand a little bit of methods, but don't have to be an expert on it. You got to have a little bit of technology, but don't have to be an expert on it. And if you need to be able to partner with experts who can take it to the next level. So I think that's what I see in observational data, and the clinical epidemiology is essentially the jack of all trades in my point of view.
I just want to add that it's not one person. I mean, that's why we have collaborations and teams, and that's why we each of us have value. And I think the uniqueness of this group is the interest from all of us to add to the science, acknowledging 100% that it's an interdisciplinary place, and that's why it's challenging, and that's what a community like ours has a great value. I do think that in the community we may be stronger in one discipline versus the other, and maybe the clinical component is where we sometimes struggle. And absolutely, we need the clinical knowledge across the entire spectrum of the work, defining, understanding, interpretation of the data, and knowing is what we're observing real or not real, important or not important. But it's definitely a collaboration, and I sometimes feel that we have some places that we are stronger than others, but there are examples where, like COVID was an example where, because of the clinical collaborators, we were able to contribute and influence the world in times in need. So I think that was a great example. Oncology is another great example. So we have definitely areas where we made influence to the clinical knowledge through the informatics interdisciplinary work that we do.
Yeah. And one final comment, and I want to link back to Andrew's initial comments about this specialized disease areas. What I've observed in the specialized disease areas is there are people who really understand the clinical idea and they discuss it. But to move it forward, you need people in that work group to have this jack of all trades kind of ability too, because many times you'll have the clinical idea evolve so far that it leaves behind the methods and the technology, and sometimes the other way around. So I found that work groups that have this blend to go further in OHDSI.
Yeah, let's respond briefly to that and kind of keep it more on point to the way the conversation has gone rather than my original question. But I think one way to understand this is that the community is maturing from a place where a single individual who is sort of a jack of all trades might try and do something, to one where there's increasingly specialized roles, and a minimal viable team that's going to do reproducible research would probably involve people who have, I would say, a science role, an informatics role, and a statistical methods role of some sort. That might be kind of classical epidemiologic designs, or it might be more in data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, depending on the kind of project that's being done. But I think those three, people, or it's hard to find people with adequate expertise in all three of those to really make sure that all of your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, even if you've got really good people. And so like some formalization of that as like a recommended team structure or minimal viable team structure, it might be something the community moves towards, and perhaps some public declaration that says people with relevant competencies in those areas are involved in the work could help to ensure the reproducibility of the research and its smooth operation.
Thank you, Andrew. So what I'm hearing here is that in order to develop your career in clinical epidemiology, you don't need necessarily to be a clinician yourself, but you do need to have a clinician perhaps in your team, right? So that's where I think OHDSI plays an important role, because we are a big team of people with different backgrounds. I think Juliana wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, related to that, I think part of the benefit of the clinician, we're talking a lot about sort of the clinical expertise with regards to, to some of the pharmaceuticals and things like that. But I also think understanding how the research fits into the clinical workflow and appreciating where there are gaps in the existing understanding of of a particular disease or a particular treatment protocol or all of those kinds of things. I think that that's a very significant benefit of a clinician, because as an epidemiologist, I might be able to recognize that there's a gap in the evidence, but I don't know how meaningful that gap is to a clinician. I don't know if that's something, you know, and it's possible that just by driving it by what I see as a gap, there could be a breakthrough that's actually very beneficial for a clinician. But there's something to be said for a clinician saying, actually, that's an important question, and that's something that would probably benefit my clinical practice in order to be able to prioritize what research actually needs to happen.
Thank you, Juliana. I think Nige wants to say something.
I definitely second all the comments that have been made so far. And if you look at experiences and, for instance, study-a-thons over time as an example, I think some of the initial study-a-thons I was involved in didn't have particularly the focused clinical input. But as that developed over time, and I'm thinking of, for instance, the RA study-a-thon from January last year, as well as the COVID-19 one, it was actually critical to what happened in the study-a-thons, and I think in terms of the methods decided and so forth. And a good example is in terms of evaluating antivirals. You probably remember that, Talita, for repurposing and looking at the HIV drugs and so forth. And actually, if you didn't understand that disease area and the conventions of how to treat, that could lead you to actually maybe incorrect assertions or decisions on your methods and also how you'd evaluate the drugs. So I think it's absolutely critical that in all studies there needs to be clinical input. And lastly, as we saw in the RA one, I think Dani would probably point to that as well. We had clinicians who are very familiar with the clinical guidelines, and certainly some of the work, for instance, trends over time and so forth, and understanding secular trends and the impacts of guidelines and so forth, and what was actually happening in reality in terms of clinical practice. Unless someone's extremely well versed again in that disease area therapeutically and also guidelines and everything else, could be a bit of a challenge, or save you time if nothing else. Otherwise, you can do a hell of a lot of literature work to get to the same level of insight.
Thank you, Nige. I think Andrew, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to echo that, both Nige and Juliana's comments, and say it was one of the main motivating forces behind defining the Proteus project team. It's coming out of work that my colleagues who are cardiologists at the Predictive Analytics and Comparative Effectiveness Center at Tufts did, and I guess the implications are literally hundreds and hundreds of predictive models are being done all the time that are never used, and where their clinical impact is not really evaluated. It's a lot of the approach to publishing them. It has a data science rather than a clinical flavor, so that performance characteristics of things are reported in the abstract without translating those into how they would actually be used to inform a clinical decision and what the impact would be on those decisions, and an effort to understand that impact. And I think that entire suite of questions is one of the things, in addition to sort of the content expertise, like the real what's required to implement something, what would happen if it is implemented, and how to evaluate it based on those terms rather than on more abstract analytic terms is a really important contribution. And so I would amend my three categories I said before of an informatician, methodologist sort of person, and a science person who might be the epidemiologist, to have a clinical perspective as well. So maybe the minimum viable team should be people in at least all those four roles.
Going back to your point earlier, Andrew, which I don't think we covered entirely, this is a community that I think has many strengths, and one of them is that we tend to be relatively agnostic to clinical areas, and or at least the methods that we try to create are relatively agnostic, and that's one of the beauties of the CDM, of course. But of course, that also means that we sometimes have a limitation in terms of granularity or fitness for purpose when it comes to a new question or a very specific area. And I would like to hear if that's okay from people like Asia or Christian, right? On their experience with expanding or working on an expansion of the CDM and to accommodate a very particular area of research like it is oncology, whether that is something that might be necessary or potentially useful for other clinical areas.
I am.
We can't hear you.
But I can, so I probably cannot answer that. I can. So, Dani, I don't know if I understand your question correctly, but are you asking about whether like having an epi or using like the epi background in particular disease, like specific areas are different, or is it useful in the early stage on? I can give a little bit of experience from what we're seeing as an epidemiologist in the oncology working group, and how I see it a little bit differently. I think like besides like the importance of having like epi folks like, and I think it's not just study design and phenotyping, it's the entire continuum of the study from the design to the execution and interpretation, that clinical epi would be very important. But within the oncology, I think is the other part that I see the importance, and I actually makes me happy, is that while we're developing these models, right, we have a lot of back and forth about like what are the needs that's currently not available in CDM and we need to implement this. And a lot of this is actually coming from the clinic. And then having this discussion that, like, for example, the data scientists and other folks of, oh, we want to do this and we want to do this, but like, is it something that's actually helpful, like for like, or how can we actually help each other to have a good and representation of the data that can benefit clinical research, right? So even like at the very early stages of developing the model, the extension, the core, the role of like clinical epi is still very, very important. I personally have seen a lot of it in the oncology working group, with the back and forth that we have with folks, like sometimes we even have oncologists on, and to see the needs and hear from them, and then like try to bring the interpretation in the design of the model and the development. Yep. I hope I answered your question.
If I can still pick your brains for a bit longer, yeah, I guess something that strikes me a little bit is the tension between the use of a CDM that has to accommodate pretty much any kind of question and the need for specificity or more specific granularity with particular conditions, and whether that's something that you think is fine from a clinical or epi perspective, or whether that is something that could potentially risk us, having to expand the CDM in different directions for different therapeutic areas, like rheumatoid arthritis might be interested in incorporating a particular DAS28 joint function score or something like that. I don't know if you feel that tension and how that can be worked out.
So it's a good question. Like, immediate answer is that it depends, right? Like, to what extent do we want to go into the details and what's a good representation, what is good enough, right? So the current CDM, if I want to do, or if anyone wants to do a study on non-small cell lung cancer, they can't do that, right? So in terms of like having a very like robust study, observational study for like any oncology specific product, we have this issue that we can't really represent the patient population. We can't describe the outcomes. So we have to do something about it. With the caveat that we know that all of them are not available, and we've been dealing like for better representation that can actually like help us like sort of like evaluate or address different study question, but not getting into the loophole of like trying to complicate things and not like creating something like that is absolutely not manageable. But I think a little bit of it is like it depends on the study, on the disease area. Oncology is sort of a unique thing by itself, that you need that detail. You need everything. A lot of those things that are not available in the CDM, like fortunately or unfortunately, to be able to do like something that can contribute to the decision making, to drug development, to everything. The tension is there. Like we still use CDM to do a lot of the studies, but like if a lot of times when we bring it back to clinician or the clinical folks, there's all this resistance. It's like, no, this is different. This is not what I want. This is like what I exactly want. So trying to just like balance that to get to a point that, okay, like let's try to use what we have and then find like the big sort of holes that we need to fill in for oncology specific. It's something that we've been working on. I know that Andrew would help a lot because he would have other or additional comments, but I'll leave it to him.
Well, yeah, I don't have additional comments, even though I'm on the oncology work group lead. Your comments are perfect. I think, and I helped Dima to lead the psychiatry work group, where his team's efforts to create standard terms for psychiatric tests help us get to levels of detail and granularity that you're referring to, Dani, that are critical to understanding, phenotypes that are used for defining populations or defining outcomes. And I think that's just something we run into continually, that the sort of the wheelhouse of OMOP started at a level that's not very granular, that doesn't lend itself to epidemiologic studies that are looking at any level that requires very, very detailed work, apart from some lab values that are in EHRs or some drug ingredient specificity. There's just a lot of high-level work, and I think one of the projects of OHDSI and OMOP is to gradually expand to create denser characterization of phenotypes and of care, and that's going to gradually enable us to answer more mechanistic questions that are often a part of epidemiologic studies that aren't purely population-based, and I think that's happening in a GIS work group. It's happening in stuff that we're working on with capturing signal data and genomic data and a variety of other kinds of data. And as we make that progress, it's just going to be, a fantastically enriched resource that we can all build on. But it's slow, arduous work that needs to be guided by people in all of those 4 categories we talked about before.
Okay, I don't see any other raise hand. Here, Jose, so one of the things that by the way, this is a very exciting conversation. That's the reason I decided to stay, even if I'm younger, Dani. So, there is one interesting aspect, right, of the CDM, and that and in general of a lot of clinical research that I think we need to take a slightly step back into the philosophy of most of the studies and what the variables are used for and how they are collected in the process of releasing a lot of research base, right? So if my understanding is correctly, all of the research that actually happens in oncology is actually, besides patient care, which is the most of the use, like we use data from patient care for the oncology. Actually, what I have seen is data that is actually centers actually hire people to fill registries, right? And there is actively people curating data, so you actually get to the point of the granularity you need, right? That's my understanding of a lot of things that happen in the realm. That is also true for a lot of research. So one of the things is that sometimes we actually get this argument in our own internal research is that, oh yes, the CDM is not granular enough. And one of the questions I ask, granular enough for what, and who is actually collecting that, and what is the effort implied in that? So I think I understand the great value and a lot of the discussion happening around the oncology, but we do have 2 resources in the current CDM that actually fits the profile to enable a lot of the research that actually need more granular data while we work in expanding the characteristics of the CDM to host that data. And that is, of course, the clinical notes and the, let's call it infamous node in the P table. Because in the clinical notes, there is a lot of the information that actually people use to fill the registries that has been used then secondarily to actually collect the variables that are needed to be more granular. And we as a community has actually put some effort to try to get that information automatically in some form of fashion. Actually, the effort that N3C is doing to have these sandboxes to be able to run distributed NLP pipeline is amazing. So one of the things that I think we could sort of try to see how to figure it out, enable, we have had a way to place nodes and to extract nodes in our community for a long while. And yes, there is a gap in specific features that we sometimes want, but I think there is a way to get it in the context of the home obsidian. While we figure it out in the expansions and the columns and the schemas that we may need to host these models, there is a way to enable some of that research now. So that is one of the things that I think you may have explored in the past. I'm sure it is, but I think we just need to be able to be more conscious that that resource exists now to enable research now.
Yeah, I want to just follow up, and even though I've spoken a little too much, as is typical, I would say we have, just for people who don't know what N3C and the NLP work that Jose was referring to is, so it's developed at Mayo by Hongfang Liu. I made sure she was invited to present on a community call, which she will be soon. And we've stood it up at Tufts. It is very lightweight. It works extremely well. It's very performant, and it's part of an open NLP network where there will be community contributions to rule sets for identifying various concepts from unstructured sources, and will, very much in keeping with the OHDSI spirit and framework, and it's designed to output to OMOP terminologies. And I recommend other people look into it and adopt it. We've tried it and it works extremely well.
Thank you, Andrew. I think since we don't have a lot of time left, maybe Dani, following up your question in the chat, I don't know if young people who joined OHDSI recently want to say something about how they think the community can help them develop their clinical epidemiology careers. Anybody willing to talk?
Hi, it's Shinhong here. Yeah, I just joined the community about last year, and I think I'm more interested in, as just to say that this clinical epi one is because I was trained in epidemiology, so I learned those methods on the classes and the courses, but actually without any clinical or pharmacy background, it's hard for me to have any deeper insight on which question is clinically important or really critical to patients or population's health. That's why I found in the community with the collaboration, we can get much more insights from clinicians, which I think would kind of guide our studies to focus on the more important, clinically important questions. So yeah, and I think I've already learned so far from the whole community. Thank you.
Thank you, Shinto. Anybody else?
Hi everyone, this is Faiza. So I decided to join this breakout session today because I'm actually an aspiring physician. So I'm in my undergrad right now, but I'm pursuing medical school, and I'm actually really interested in understanding like medicine and public health at a population level, because I think it's important to be able to see the bigger picture before you can, I guess, help treat people at an individual patient level. So I think this conversation has been really insightful so far. I absolutely agree with what was mentioned earlier in the discussion about how a single team should consist of people from various disciplines. And I'm currently part of the early stage researchers working group. And I think that, as I lead that group, that's definitely going to be something that I'll think more about. So yeah, thank you. I guess thank you everyone for sharing your experiences.
Thank you, Faiza. Jodianne, you want to say something?
So for me, one of the things that drew me to this group is really the fact that I've worked mainly in like patient-centered outcomes research area in the past, and really me wanting to understand, okay, this clinical epidemiology group, like how my past experience and what's being done in this area, I think that will probably lend itself very well to kind of bridge the two, because I'm very, very interested in population health and really how to not just take what's clinically relevant, but also how do I apply some of the methods right now to learn in and really answer in some of those clinical questions. I've worked a lot with clinicians in the past who really do struggle from taking their actual question that they have to really, you know, defining what population they're going to use and the methods that they're going to use. So I really want to develop in that area, and that's one of the reasons why I joined.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Yeah. So I'm JB, and I think I joined the community very recently, actually, maybe within the last few weeks. I've been dipping in and out. I look very young, younger face, but I'm sure I'm a little bit older. I just have a baby face. I think I found that this call really has been really useful, and the thoughts that a lot of people have shared has really resonated with my background and experience. I joined this particular call because I thought it would be useful to really engage with other epidemiologists. My background is in pharmacy and then epidemiology in medicine, and I think that what everyone has shared today really underpins the importance of a multidisciplinary collaborative effort in actually achieving anything that we can do. And with a forum like this, I know that there's great opportunity for more advanced methodological and technological concepts that I could learn from. And surely I have been learning for the last few weeks that I've joined. And I think that with time, I'll be able to contribute once I understand and read the OHDSI book properly to understand all that's going on in this environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Dani, I saw your question in the chat. Could you give us tips as like a senior?
Are you calling me senior?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, no, I guess something that you know, people like Fights and Shintong, you know, at this stage of your career is important is to, at least in my own experience, to understand that there is a little bit of you know, serendipity and chance in your decisions, and I think it's fine if you know what you want to do, and if you have a very clear idea of where you want to get, you will get there, right? So it doesn't matter so much you know, if you choose one path or the other, as soon as you have a clear objective. I think that's the most important thing. You know, I think Talita, if I remember correctly, you are a nurse by training in university originally. I am a doctor, and in the end, we probably ended up learning similar things and ended doing similar work. I think what really matters is that, you know, you choose what you really want to do in that moment, but also at the same time having a clear goal in the longer term. I don't know if others will back me up or will think differently, but that's at least my own experience.
Thank you, Dani. I totally agree with that. Asa, you want to say something? Thank you.
I'm not senior or that experienced, but but I have it there. I think the biggest advice I would give is definitely take an open-minded approach. This discipline is clinical epidemiology is not new, but there's a lot of modern science that is going in the different components of the work that is done in this field. And so it rapidly changes. Technology, you know, moves super fast, and even our understanding of statistics and all that goes on there. So definitely, I think the biggest advice would be keep an open mind. Don't be threatened by new innovations. Innovation is definitely a big part of this discipline, and you just need to keep track and keep open to new ways of doing things and not feel threatened by any other discipline that is related and has something to add. Just because it's really multidisciplinary and it really every discipline has a value for us to be able to control the biases that exist in all the work we do. So yeah, keep an open approach and don't be threatened and just keep learning.
I'm going to offer 2 cents as well. I think being brave and just not being afraid to contribute or to lead. It's a wide open community, and it's a different style of doing research than traditional academic or government or private sector based research, and that you're so collaborative, and you're going to get a lot of support if you take on kind of role. I mean, don't be completely foolhardy just going into some area you really have no background whatsoever in. But I think there's more opportunity and more support than you might realize to make progress, and it's a new kind of style of research and an evolving area where there's lots of opportunities to make a contribution. So I would say be brave and kind of reach out and network and kind of get familiar with how this large open science community does stuff, and you will be amply rewarded. That would be my tip.
Thank you, Andrew. I think we're now at a time to close. I think one tip from my side will be surround yourself by people that you think are smarter than you. And I think the OHDSI community is the perfect place for that. But then work hard on your imposter syndrome. Don't get too hard on yourself. And I think that will be the main tip from me. So yeah, thank you everybody for sharing. I think this was very productive. It was very nice to hear from all of you. Yeah, we'll keep in touch. Thank you. Have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.